Ned Stark knelt upon the raised wooden platform with his hands bound before him, sunlight glinting against the metal of the executioner's sword. The crowd on the plaza floor stretched around him, a gallery of fearful and curious onlookers caught in the shadow of the great September of Baelor. Joffrey Baratheon, though Ned knew full well the boy was no true Baratheon, lounged on the high seat, flanked by the sharp gazes of the Queen Regent, Cersei, and the cold cunning of Lord Peter Baelish. Guards in Lannister crimson formed a solid wall around the dais. As the king's words boomed through the air, demanding confession of crimes Ned had not committed, a hush rose and fell through the throng. There was stillness in the city, stillness that carried the breath of all those gathered, as if the entire realm held its wind in anticipation of the blow that would silence the Lord of Winterfell forever. A memory of ice and winter flitted through Ned's mind. He thought of his daughters, Sansa and Arya, somewhere in this city. He thought of Catelyn, Robb, and all those he loved who were far away in the north, ignorant of his fate until ravens brought them the dreadful truth. He raised his eyes to Joffrey's smirking face, waiting for some last sign of mercy, but the boy king gave none. A robed man read aloud the crimes of treason, each word feeling like a hammer blow. Ned Stark had conspired to unseat the king, to place a bastard upon the Iron Throne, to speak rank treason. Joffrey had demanded Ned's head, and the crowd bristled, some onlookers baying for the blood of the fallen hand, others standing in hushed disbelief. Time felt as though it bent and slowed. Ned could hear his heart thudding in his ears. Across from him, he caught a glimpse of his older daughter's face, Sansa, pale and tear-streaked, watching from behind the cordon of Lannister guards. For a moment, Ned tried to muster the last shreds of fatherly reassurance, but he could not. He had prayed for an intervention that would never come. Then, the executioner stepped forward, dressed in black. Ser Ilan Payne raised the greatsword in both hands. Sunlight flashed one final time, bright and merciless. Ned was forced to bow his head. He heard the sharp whisper of steel slicing air, and then a sudden thunder of voices, shouts, and the clang of metal. He braced himself to feel the iron bite, but no impact came. Instead, a scream echoed, the roar of a crowd turning in confusion. The entire dais shook as a band of cloaked men poured forth through the lines of guards. Steel clashed against steel in a clamor that filled the plaza with shrieks and the horrified gasps of noble bystanders. The shock of rescue, of an outright assault in the heart of King's Landing, startled everyone. Joffrey, Cersei, the gold cloaks. Chaos erupted as half a dozen men, unknown to Ned at a glance, converged with lethal precision on the Lannister guard stationed near him. One of them crashed shoulder first into Ser Ilan Payne, tackling him away from Ned in a tangle of limbs. Cersei shouted for the gold cloaks to restore order. Swords sang. High Sparrow watchers screamed prayers for mercy. The melee became a swirl of shapes and cries. Ned's head snapped from side to side in alarm. He could not see Sansa, he could not see Arya. All that existed was the skirmish at hand, and the stunning realization that in the midst of this bedlam, he still lived. Strong hands reached him. He felt rope parted by a swift knife. He dared to raise his gaze, half expecting some dream or a mocking trick. The man crouching before him wore leather armor tooled with a small sigil, a single spear transfixed by a sun. It was the sigil of House Martell of Dorne. The man's face was unfamiliar, but the determination in his eyes was unmistakable. He said no word, merely gripped Ned's arm. Another man joined him, hauling Ned unceremoniously upright and dragging him off the platform. The Lannister guards recovered their wits and closed in. More men in Dornish garb pressed forward, outnumbered but fighting with ferocious skill. Over the ring of blades, Ned heard the shrill voice of Joffrey howling, "Stop them! Kill them all!" The cloaked Dornish warriors shepherded Ned through the throng, slipping past fallen bodies and locked swords. One of them, half-turning, shouted, "Move!" They were attempting to weave a path out of the plaza, but the gold cloaks formed a ring. For a moment it appeared they would be trapped. Then a number of ragged figures in city garb swarmed into the gold cloaks' backs, throwing stones and brandishing clubs. A riotous wave formed, pushing the guards away long enough for Ned's rescuers to slip through a gap by one of the septri arches. All was a tangle of color and motion. Filthy streets, rotting vegetable carts overturning, screams echoing from corners. Ned found himself stumbling over the uneven cobblestone, the men around him half carrying, half dragging him away from the square. He had no idea what had precipitated this rescue or who truly commanded it. He did, however, notice the bold presence of that Dornish sigil on cloaks, belt buckles, and worn leather shields. Adrenaline and confusion blanketed him. He fought to regain his composure. "Where are you taking me?" His voice emerged hoarse, barely audible, but the question was lost in the clamor. They wound through back alleys, avoiding main thoroughfares. The stench of the city rose around them, pungent and relentless, mingling with the metallic tang of blood. Ned's thoughts whirled, but he forced himself to focus on survival. The men pressed on, leading him deeper toward the city's southwestern quarter. Eventually, they burst into a cramped courtyard. A handful of dappled horses stood tethered. Another band of men waited, some armed with spears, others with short blades. At their center, distinctive and tall, stood a dark-haired man with a pointed beard that Ned recognized. Prince Oberyn Martell, the Red Viper of Dorne. Oberyn's eyes flickered with a sort of triumphant intensity as Ned approached. Before Ned could speak, Oberyn jerked his chin to two of his companions. "Get him on a horse." Then, addressing Ned, he said in a low, urgent voice, "Lord Stark, you must trust me for now." Ned's mind reeled. Oberyn Martell, of all people? He had known that Prince Oberyn was in King's Landing, but never had he imagined a rescue. Yet, the princely arrogance in Oberyn's stance carried an unwavering sense of purpose. Ned hesitated, wanting answers, wanting to protest that he must find his daughters. But the press of time weighed heavily. The city guard would be after them in force. With effort, Ned's eyes cleared, and he nodded. "For now," he muttered, voice still trembling. The Dornish fighters helped Ned mount a strong, slender courser. His bound wrists were raw. The rope no longer hung from them, but every slight movement stung. The men from Dorne formed a protective cordon around him, Oberyn at the lead, and they thundered out of the courtyard, deeper into the labyrinth of King's Landing. They avoided the gold cloaks that patrolled the main roads. More than once, they were forced to wait in breathless silence behind a stack of crates or beneath the eaves of a dilapidated building, while soldiers marched past on frantic patrol. At last, they approached a hidden gate in the city wall near the southwestern sector, typically used to bring in certain goods. The Martells had bribed their way in or threatened the guards with steel. For Ned, it was all a blur. He tasted freedom in the cool air beyond the walls. The forested roads leading away from King's Landing beckoned them, offering refuge beyond the capital's stench of betrayal. The small band galloped hard, leaving dust in their wake, the city receding behind them with each stride. Ned, unarmed and battered, found himself clutching the horse's mane. His heart throbbed with fear for Sansa, for Arya, but he was powerless for the moment. They rode until dusk. A hush settled among the group as the sky darkened and turned to a bruised violet. Only then did Oberyn rein in. They gathered off the road, near a stand of trees. Torches and flint were produced, and a small fire was kindled beneath the canopy. Ned, stiff and utterly exhausted, dismounted with difficulty. As he rested against a tree trunk, Oberyn approached. The prince's face was lined with something akin to sympathy, though tempered by calculation. "Lord Stark, we have little time for formalities. If we remain this close to King's Landing, the Lannisters will send men after us. You need to ride south with me to Sunspear." Ned swallowed. "My daughters." Oberyn's lips pressed into a thin line. "I could not reach them. I had to choose. Save you or no one. We lost men to make certain you escaped. I vow to you, if it lies in my power, we will recover your daughters. But right now, your life is in jeopardy." Grief twisted in Ned's chest. The knowledge that Sansa was still in Joffrey's clutches felt like an iron spike lodged in his lungs. Perhaps Arya, too. As much as he hated it, Oberyn spoke the truth. There was nothing to be gained by rushing headlong back into the city. If the Lannisters caught Ned again, he would not survive a second time. Perhaps alive and free, he could bargain for their safe return. "Why?" Ned asked quietly, voice gravelly with exhaustion. "Why save me? The Martells have no love for House Stark." A faint wry smile touched Oberyn's lips. "Because we both have reason to hate the Lannisters. My sister Elia was murdered at the sack of King's Landing, and the Lannisters have never paid for that crime. The entire realm trembles before them, but Dorne does not forget. And you, Lord Stark, you have good reason to see them unseated as well. Word has reached my brother, Prince Doran, that you have discovered the truth about the Boy King's parentage. That knowledge could light a fire across the 7 kingdoms." Ned's jaw clenched. "I never wanted to set the realm ablaze. I wanted justice and truth." Oberyn's tone hardened. "Justice, truth, call it what you will. The Lannisters want you dead because you threaten their claims. They imprisoned you, made a spectacle of your supposed guilt, and would have had your head if we had not intervened. You stand at the center of a storm that can break the Lannisters' hold. Dorne wants that storm." Silence fell between them, broken only by the crackle of fire and the soft nickers of the horses. Ned looked into Oberyn's unwavering gaze. He realized that though Oberyn was cunning, vengeful, and dangerous, he offered an alliance that no other realm had dared propose to House Stark. The North had its pride, but it was far, far away, and currently embroiled with the complexities of Tywin Lannister's threats at the Riverlands. War was breaking out in the Riverlands, or soon would. Ned sensed that the entire realm stood on a precipice. At length, Ned whispered, "We ride south." Oberyn nodded once, as though it were never in doubt. "We leave at first light." That night, Ned slept in fitful snatches, haunted by visions of Sansa alone in the Red Keep, Arya missing and silent, and the memory of Joffrey's malicious stare. But a new line of thought began to spark within him. If he could survive, if he could rally the Starks of Winterfell and these unlikely allies from Dorne, there might be a path to right the wrongs that had engulfed the realm. He thought of Robert's rebellion, of how improbable alliances had toppled a dynasty. Perhaps another rebellion, or something akin to it, loomed on the horizon. They continued riding at dawn, forging a path into the Reach under cautious secrecy. Oberyn had no illusions that the Lannisters would remain idle. He expected that riders would be sent to hunt them. But Oberyn's men were swift, and they used hidden byways and seldom-traveled roads to keep ahead of pursuit. During the journey, Ned learned that it was Prince Doran Martell who had orchestrated this brazen rescue. Oberyn had only come to King's Landing under the pretense of diplomatically attending to the King's Name Day celebrations. Secretly, they had begun funneling weapons and men into the city, forging alliances with those who hated the Lannisters, gathering intelligence on the families who might be swayed by promises of revenge or advantage. Then, upon hearing that Joffrey intended to execute Ned Stark, they enacted their desperate plan. It might yet cost them dearly if they did not move quickly. The further south they traveled, the more Ned sensed they were leaving the rest of the realm behind. He passed villages under the watch of local lords loyal to House Tyrell, but Oberyn's men took great pains to avoid any run-in. The Tyrells had not openly declared for or against the Lannisters yet, though Marjorie Tyrell was rumored to be a potential match for the young king. Ned was certain that if the Tyrells perceived the Martells leading Ned Stark through their domain, they would demand immediate explanations. The last thing either party wanted was more conflict with a major house. Still, news traveled at a different pace than them. Rumors had likely begun to fester in King's Landing. Rumors of Ned Stark's miraculous survival or rumors of a savage Dornish raid. In the nights around their campfires, Oberyn offered little insight into the future, only dropping cryptic remarks about how Dorne stood ready to fight at last, if the cause was just and the prize vengeance. Sweet enough. Eventually, the dryness of the air changed, and the rolling green hills of the Reach gradually gave way to the blazing heat and rocky landscapes near the Red Mountains. Ned felt sweat bead on his brow. His northern blood found the southern climate oppressive, but he forced himself to endure. Days blurred together. The spare talk in the party was overshadowed by the urgency of their mission. Through winding passes and steep defile, they navigated the stony ridges of the Prince's Pass. At the final crest that overlooked Dorne proper, Ned found his breath catching. He saw wide swathes of desert and arid plains stretching as far as the eye could see, rippling with shimmering heat. He had ventured to Dorne only once in his life, after the close of Robert's rebellion, in pursuit of the Tower of Joy and the secrets that had changed his life forever. That was to the west near the Red Mountains. But now, here he was, riding under Prince Oberyn's protection, hoping to rally an alliance that might shape the fate of the Seven Kingdoms anew. They descended carefully, picking their way along the winding roads. The nights grew longer, the days hotter. Food was sparse, but water was carried in skins. The Dornishmen traveled with an easy comfort in this terrain, while Ned suffered from the unaccustomed heat and dryness of his throat. However, as they proceeded deeper into Dorne, the threat of Lannister pursuers lessened. This was hostile territory for the Lions. At last, they emerged onto the wide desert paths that led to Sunspear, seat of House Martell. Tall, slender towers jutted from behind thick walls of pale stone. The city spread outward in a cluster of narrow streets, capturing the glare of the sun in 1,000 whitewashed surfaces. To Ned's eyes, it looked both beautiful and forbidding. Yet he was reminded that the Martells had once been formidable foes even for the Targaryens, who had conquered nearly the entire continent but had never wholly subjugated Dorne by force. When Ned entered the fortress walls of Sunspear, he was met with curious stares from the Dornish courtiers. Some seemed overtly hostile, for the memory of Elia Martell's brutal death weighed heavily on all of Dorne, and the involvement of the Starks and Baratheons in the downfall of the Targaryens had never sat well here. Others showed something akin to guarded interest, for the North had never been their direct enemy, and Ned's reputation for honor was well known. In a private solar that overlooked the sea, Ned came face to face with Prince Doran Martell. The Prince of Dorne was seated in a chair, his gout-stricken legs propped on a cushioned stool. His expression was reserved, eyes watchful, as though measuring Ned's every breath. Oberyn, standing by his brother's side, spoke first. "Brother, Lord Eddard Stark of Winterfell." Prince Doran inclined his head, and his voice, though gentle, carried a shrewd undercurrent. "Lord Stark, you have had a trying journey. You have my condolences for all you have suffered in King's Landing." Ned bowed stiffly. "Thank you, Prince Doran. I am in your debt for your intervention, though I never expected such an act from you. You risked a great deal to save my life." Doran shifted slightly, grimacing at the pain in his legs. "Yes, we have risked much, but if we are to break the Lannisters' stranglehold on the throne, we need a catalyst. I believe that you, Lord Stark, hold knowledge that could destabilize their entire claim. So it came down to that, the matter of Joffrey's parentage." Ned turned his gaze from Doran to Oberyn, seeing that same intense hunger for retribution. In a quiet tone, Ned revealed what he had learned from his investigation in King's Landing. The truth that the children of Cersei and Robert Baratheon were none of Robert's at all, but rather fathered by her twin brother, Jaime. The black-haired seed that ran through House Baratheon was nowhere to be found in Joffrey, Myrcella, or Tommen. Prince Doran's face remained calm, but the flicker in his eyes showed satisfaction. "And your confirmation of this as hand of the late King Robert would hold weight. Were this truth broadcast to the realm, the Lannisters would lose all legitimacy. Of course, they will deny it, but you have the means to prove it." Ned's mind drifted to the book of lineages he had borrowed from the Red Keep's library. The confessions gleaned from Baelish's subtle hints, the black-haired bastard children fathered by Robert. "I did have certain pieces of evidence, but they remain in King's Landing." Oberyn's jaw set. "We can find other ways to prove it. Witnesses or perhaps more direct confirmation. The rumors alone might be enough to sow chaos if they come from you." Ned nodded, though he felt a pang of regret for how events had spiraled. Yet, simply exposing Joffrey's false claim doesn't solve the immediate problem. "My daughters remain in Lannister hands, at least Sansa. Arya's whereabouts are uncertain. The realm is on the brink of war." He paused, summoning what dignity he could. "I am in no mood to become a puppet for Dorne. If we are to form an alliance, it must be for the good of the realm, not merely vengeance." Prince Doran steepled his fingers. "The good of the realm and vengeance can coincide. My house has endured humiliations and tragedies at the hands of the Lannisters. For years, we have simmered in silence, watching them tighten their grip. Now, with Robert dead, they fancy themselves unassailable. But the North is strong, and if allied with Dorne, and perhaps other houses that resent Lannister dominance, there is a real chance to unmake their power. We will free your daughter or daughters, if the gods are merciful, and the Lannisters will answer for their crimes." Ned felt the heat of Dorne pressing on him like the dryness of the midday sun. He did not want to burn the realm in some war of revenge. Yet he could not see how any peace was possible with Joffrey on the throne, guided by Cersei and Tywin Lannister. If there were a chance to spare Sansa from their clutches, and to restore order, then forging alliances was the only path forward. But he was no longer the king's hand. He held no official power. All he had was his name, House Stark, and the North. Even that was uncertain, for word of his supposed treachery might. He drew a long breath, ignoring the clammy sweat that beaded along his temples. "If I do this, I will need to reunite with my son Robb. The bannermen of the North will not lightly join forces with Dorne. Not after the stories they've been told. But if they know I still live, that I call for them to unite against the Lannisters, there's a chance they will march under my banner." Oberyn looked to Doran, and a faint smile curved Doran's lips. "We will send ravens, but more than that, we will plan carefully. The Lannisters may move faster, so we must be ready to strike. My brother tells me you are a man of honor, Lord Stark. Let us see if that honor can help us unite. Vengeance is best served cold, but in Dorne, we prefer it served burning hot." So the bargain was struck. Ned Stark would remain in Sunspear under the Martells' protection for a time, as they worked to rally supporters and gather intelligence. From Dorne, they would send covert messages to the North and to the Riverlands, to any who might still be loyal to House Stark or stand against the Lannisters. The Martells would keep Ned alive and assist in any plan to rescue Sansa. In return, Ned would lend his name, credibility, and any knowledge he had to delegitimize Joffrey's reign, thereby fueling a rebellion that would topple the Lannisters. In the weeks that followed, Ned found himself an unlikely guest in the sun-scorched halls of Sunspear. The Martell seat was a place of airy balconies, mosaic-tiled corridors, and courtyards filled with lemon trees and pomegranate groves. The shade and the breezes off the sea provided some relief from the Dornish sun. Tensions were high, though. Word arrived of hostilities in the Riverlands, of Tywin Lannister launching brutal assaults on Tully lands, presumably as retribution for the abduction of Tyrion Lannister by Catelyn Stark. Robb Stark was rumored to be gathering an army in the north. Meanwhile, King Joffrey was enthroned in the Red Keep, dispensing what he called justice, likely tormenting Sansa in the process. Ravens flitted in and out of the rookery, carrying coded messages to lords who might be sympathetic. The Martells used old grudges and promises of greater independence to coax possible allies in the Reach, such as minor houses overshadowed by the Tyrells. They reached out to the Stormlands too, where some might resent Joffrey's claim as Robert's heir. Doran Martell moved slowly and carefully, matching each piece on the board to ensure that when open war came, the Lannisters would be overwhelmed. Oberyn grew restless. He sparred with Ned in a courtyard ring at times, though Ned's heart was not truly in it, burdened by worry for his family. The Red Viper's style was flamboyant, agile, reliant on swift thrusts of his spear and deep knowledge of poisons. More than once, Ned had to remind himself that this man was now his ally, though he had no illusions about Oberyn's fierce temperament. One humid evening, Ned was pacing a gallery that overlooked the sea. Torchlight flickered along the stone walls. He glanced down, noticing the small boats bobbing in the harbor. Dorne's fleet was not nearly as large as the royal fleet of King's Landing, nor that of the Redwyne ships from the Arbor, but it was significant. The Martells might be planning a naval aspect to their rebellion. As if conjured by Ned's brooding, Oberyn appeared, arms folded across his chest. "You are uneasy, Lord Stark," Ned exhaled softly. "I cannot deny it. My daughter remains in that viper's nest. I should be doing more. Plans, letters. It feels so slow. In the north, I am accustomed to direct action. You see your enemy, you strike." Oberyn leaned against the wall, half smiling. "The Red Viper prefers direct strikes as well, but my brother believes in cunning. I cannot say he is wrong. We are outnumbered if we fling ourselves blindly at the Lannisters. We must wait until the time is right. But I do have news that may interest you. A raven arrived not long ago from the Riverlands. Your son Robb has called the banners. He has marched south, and there are rumors that he outmaneuvered Tywin Lannister's forces at the Twins. Some speak of a great victory." Ned's heart leapt at the possibility. "Robb, a victory, you say?" "Yes, though details are scarce. Something about capturing Jaime Lannister." Oberyn's eyes glimmered with dark amusement. "If that is true, the Kingslayer is a valuable prisoner indeed." Ned remembered Jaime Lannister's smug face, the arrogance of the Golden Knight who had slain the Mad King. If he was truly captured, then House Stark had a powerful bargaining chip. "If we have Jaime," Ned said slowly, "then we can negotiate for Sansa's release." "Perhaps," Oberyn admitted. "Though Tywin will be furious. He might lash out and refuse. The Lannisters rarely cede ground without a high price. Nevertheless, a Lannister in chains is cause for celebration in Dorne." Ned's mind churned with the implications. "I must get word to my son. Tell him that I live, that we may have an alliance forming with Dorne. If we coordinate with his forces in the Riverlands, then perhaps we can corner the Lannisters on two fronts." Oberyn laughed softly. "Send your raven. I'm sure my brother will do the same." Then, more gravely, he asked, "But what of the Baratheon brothers? Stannis and Renly? Do you think they will accept the truth of Joffrey's parentage and claim the throne for themselves?" Ned recalled Stannis, solemn, just unyielding. If anyone had the rightful claim to the Iron Throne by the laws of succession, it was Stannis Baratheon, Robert's elder brother. Then there was Renly, more charming and sociable, who had already begun styling himself king with the support of the Reach. Renly was forging alliances with Mace Tyrell by way of marriage to Marjorie. The realm risked fracturing among multiple claimants. "I do not know," Ned murmured. "But if Stannis truly learns the truth, he will not rest until the Iron Throne is his by right. Whether we would join him is another question." Oberyn's mouth curved. "Dorne does not forget that Stannis once blockaded our coasts during Robert's rebellion. And Renly? He is untested, though his alliance with the Tyrells might be formidable. Whichever path is chosen, I suspect the Lannisters remain the greatest threat." Ned turned back to the sea, a swirl of conflicting loyalties and possibilities battling in his mind. "We need time, and we need to ensure Sansa's safety. Then we will see what alliances are possible." With each passing day, the shape of the conflict came into clearer focus. The War of the Five Kings, people would call it, or so Ned heard from rumors crossing the narrow sea and trickling back. If the North declared for one king, and Dorne for another, the realm might tear itself apart. Yet, perhaps there was a slender chance to unify at least some of the kingdoms against the Lannisters by using Ned's survival as a rallying cry. Prince Doran gradually introduced Ned to more of Dorne's nobles, forging personal connections. Some greeted Ned with cool courtesy, while others were more openly curious. Lady Nemella Toland, Lord Euler, Lord Dane of Starfall, each had reasons to resent the Lannisters or the Tyrells. They might provide troops, but only if they saw a real chance for success. Meanwhile, Oberyn began training small companies of Dornish spearmen with new tactics designed for open-field battles in the temperate climes north of the Red Mountains, anticipating that eventually their armies would have to march beyond Dorne's scorching deserts. The Dornish archers, famed for their deadly accuracy, practiced relentlessly. Supply lines were planned. Ned was consulted on the nature of northern warfare, the Lannister approach to battle, and which routes through the Crownlands might be most vulnerable. He tried to give what information he could, all the while longing for more direct news of his family. Then at last, a raven from Robb Stark arrived. It was carried in the small hours of the morning, the black bird cawing raucously from the window slits of the tower. Ned was roused from a restless sleep. When he read the message by candlelight, his hands shook. "Father," the letter began, its style unpolished but urgent. "Word reached us that you were executed, but now rumor says otherwise. If you still draw breath, I beg you send me a sign. We have captured Jaime Lannister and hold him in Riverrun." Mother parleyed for Sansa's release, but the Lannisters hold her in King's Landing as a hostage. Arya remains missing, though we hear rumors she escaped the city. "The North stands behind me, though all speak of the king in the North. They name me a king, though I did not seek this crown. I do what must be done. If you live, command me." Ned's breath caught at the reference to the king in the North. So the bannermen had chosen to proclaim Robb as king. These were times of upheaval indeed. He wrote a reply immediately, explaining the rescue in King's Landing, confirming that he was with the Martells in Sunspear, forging an alliance to confront the Lannisters on a southern front. He counseled caution in any exchange for Sansa's life. Jaime might be the key to securing her. He sealed the letter and rushed it to the rookery. Then he waited with a heart full of turmoil. By this time, the tensions in the Seven Kingdoms were spreading like wildfire. Reports suggested that Renly Baratheon had declared himself king of the Seven Kingdoms, supported by House Tyrell. Stannis remained at Dragonstone, presumably gathering men and ships, proclaiming that Joffrey was not Robert's true heir, and that only he, Stannis, had the rightful claim. The North, outraged by Ned's near execution, had broken away from the Iron Throne altogether, naming Robb as king in the North. Meanwhile, Joffrey sat the Iron Throne in King's Landing, a puppet of the Lannisters. Doran Martell, quietly assembling an army, had not yet declared for anyone, but he had begun hosting small councils with Ned present. They argued the merits of supporting Stannis, or forging ties with Renly to crush the Lannisters quickly. "But we have Eddard Stark," Oberyn pointed out. "That alone is a major advantage, for the realm believes him to be an honorable man, betrayed by the Lannisters. If we come forward with him and denounce Joffrey, the resulting furor could break the Lannisters' hold on King's Landing before the year is out. If we move too openly, too soon," Doran cautioned, "we invite reprisal. Tywin Lannister will be forced to react, perhaps marching an army through the Prince's Pass while we are not yet fully prepared. Our best chance is to strike when they are engaged on multiple fronts." So they continued planning, day by day, even as Ned's heart yearned to ride back to the capital and tear down the Red Keep stone by stone to find Sansa. But he held himself in check. A letter came from Catelyn, smuggled south via uncertain channels, letting him know she had not found Arya, that she was aiding Robb with the war effort, that she prayed night and day for Ned's safety if those rumors were true. Ned wept upon reading it, in the privacy of his chambers. Finally, Dorne's moment arrived. Scouts brought word that Tywin Lannister had split his forces in the Riverlands, leaving fewer men to guard the Crownlands. The royal fleet was also said to be in disarray after some sabotage rumored to be orchestrated by Stannis. The route to King's Landing was more vulnerable than it had been in months. Prince Doran resolved that if the North pressed from the Riverlands and Dorne pressed from the south, the Lannisters might be trapped. The crucial piece would be ensuring that Renly and the Tyrells did not arrive first or attempt to seize the city for themselves. Ned found himself riding north from Sunspear at the head of a Dornish army. The sun glinted off spear points and curved blades. War horns echoed through the passes as they marched. Prince Oberyn led the vanguard, mounted on a swift charger, the Sunspear sigil rippling on bright banners behind him. Ned rode alongside Ser Demon Sand, the bastard of God's grace, a capable knight who had pledged his sword to protect the Stark Lord. Around them, the disciplined columns of Dornish spearmen advanced with surprising speed, even burdened with supplies and siege engines. The plan was to converge near the Stormlands, gauge whether any local lords would join them or at least grant them safe passage, and then move up the Rose Road or perhaps the Bone Way to threaten King's Landing from the southeast. As they moved northward, Ned glimpsed the devotion with which the Dornish fighters held themselves. Men and women both in the ranks, for Dorne was more progressive about such matters. Their hatred of the Lannisters fueled them, and Ned realized with a grim sense of irony that the one house Robert had never truly subdued might well be the one that unseated his alleged son. Messages flew between Ned and Robb. The king in the north had won more engagements against the Lannisters in the Riverlands, keeping Tywin's main host occupied. If all went well, the forces of the north and Riverlands would push the Lannisters back toward King's Landing from the west, while the Dornish advanced from the south. Surrounded by enemies and confronted with Ned Stark's survival, the Lannisters would either sue for peace or face annihilation. The great worry, of course, was that Joffrey might take out his vengeance on Sansa. But the presence of Jaime as a hostage was some deterrent, one that Catelyn wielded fiercely. Ned prayed to the old gods for his daughter's safety. He even found himself kneeling in a small sept that the Martells had erected along the way, though he was more comfortable with Weirwoods than with the Seven. In his heart, he vowed that once he had secured Sansa, he would find Arya, wherever she might be. Rumors persisted that a girl matching Arya's description was seen fleeing the city shortly after Ned's execution was staged, and that she might be wandering the war-torn countryside. The thought chilled him, but for now, the main concern was toppling the Lannisters before further harm could befall all of Westeros. Traversing the Stormlands required careful negotiation with local lords, some of whom had declared for Renly. The young Baratheon king was rumored to be camped near Highgarden, forging an even stronger alliance with the Tyrells. To Ned's relief, the Martell envoys managed to purchase or charm safe passage through a few key strongholds. They faced some skirmishes with rogue mountain clans and outlaws, but no pitched battle. After many long weeks, they arrived at the outskirts of the Crownlands. The fields were parched, villages mostly abandoned or burned, testifying to the chaos the realm had sunk into. War had turned these once lush farms into a patchwork of devastation. The Dornish host, though disciplined, could not pass unnoticed, and word of their approach spread. Lannister scouts and outriders skirmished with their vanguard. A handful of gold-cloaked cavalry from King's Landing tested their mettle, only to be swiftly repulsed by Oberyn's spear phalanx. Ned's banner was flown alongside the Martell sigil for all to see, the grey direwolf of House Stark. That alone caused some stir. The tale of Ned's supposed execution had circulated widely, but now men saw with their own eyes that Eddard Stark rode again, allied with the Dornish. In the distance, the walls of King's Landing rose, crowned by the Red Keep perched upon Aegon's high hill. Smoke from the city's chimneys traced faint lines in the sky. Ned's heart lurched at the sight. Inside those walls was his daughter, held captive by the twisted boy king who'd nearly ended his life. But he would not charge blindly into the gates. The city was not an easy target. Its walls were tall and thick, and the defending garrison would be substantial. They needed Robb's cooperation, or at least for Tywin's main force to be pinned down. They made camp along the Rosby Road, out of range of the city's archers, but clearly visible to any watchers on the walls. Dornish outriders scouted the surrounding countryside, intercepting any attempt by the gold cloaks to sally forth. Over the next few days, more ravens were dispatched. Ned had no illusions that the city's inhabitants would suffer from a siege, but the alternative was to allow the Lannisters free rein. If the gates opened, it would likely be to spew forth more war. At dawn on the 5th day of their encampment, a clarion call sounded throughout the camp. Ned emerged from his tent to see a flurry of activity at the horizon. Dust clouds rose along the main approach from the west, as if a great host was on the move. Guards shouted. Men scrambled to mount their horses, expecting an attack. Ned's stomach tightened, wondering if Tywin Lannister had returned to defend King's Landing. But as the shapes came into focus, Ned recognized banners that made his chest seize in a complex mixture of hope and alarm. The direwolf of House Stark, the Trout of House Tully, the flayed man of House Bolton, and others from the north. Robb had arrived or was about to. The two armies approached cautiously, unsure if the Lannisters might ambush them. But soon enough, scouts confirmed that it was indeed the northern host, led by Robb Stark, accompanied by the great Jon Umber, Roose Bolton, and other northern lords, as well as Tully forces under Edmure Tully's banner. They set up a separate encampment not far from the Dornish lines. Tensions were high, for many of the Northerners were not well predisposed to the Dornish, thanks to old hostilities from the Robert's Rebellion era or older feuds. But Ned, ignoring protocol, mounted his horse and rode out with a small escort to find his son. His heart hammered as he entered the northern camp. Rough-spoken men parted, some gawking in disbelief at the sight of the Lord of Winterfell, alive after all. They whispered to one another, voice thick with wonder or suspicion. Then Ned saw Robb, tall and stern for his age, red-brown hair blowing in the breeze, gray eyes pinned on Ned as though he could not believe his own sight. Robb dismounted and dropped to his knees before his father, tears brimming in his eyes. Ned slid from his saddle and gripped his son's shoulders. He felt the trembling in Robb's body. They looked at each other for a long moment, each burdened by months of fear and heartbreak. Then Ned pulled him into a tight embrace. A cheer rose among the Northmen who witnessed it. Some openly wept. Others roared approval. When at last they parted, Ned took in the changes in Robb. The boy he had left in Winterfell was now a young man, battered by war, forced into the mantle of kingship. "You are taller," Ned managed, voice thick. Robb swallowed hard. Aye, father, how is this possible? They said you were dead." "Yes," Ned said. "I almost was, but Prince Oberyn of Dorne and his men intervened. Since then, I have been their guest, forging an alliance to bring down the Lannisters." Robb's gaze slid past Ned's shoulder to the Dornish banners and men forming up at a distance. "We heard rumors, but I did not believe. The men will be wary of them. They are not well liked in the north." Ned squeezed his son's shoulder. "We need them, Robb. We cannot face the Lannisters alone, not if King's Landing stands behind them. With Dorne's support, we can press the city from multiple directions. And above all else, your sister, Sansa. We must free her." Robb nodded, jaw tight with emotion. "We have Jaime Lannister in chains. Mother thought to trade him, but so far, the Lannisters have refused. They still hold Sansa, and apparently they do not care to make an even exchange." His voice shook with anger. "Joffrey grows bolder by the—" Ned closed his eyes briefly, pained by the knowledge that Jaime's capture had not secured Sansa's release. So the Lannisters played a different game, one that scorned the usual rules of courtesy in hostage exchanges. "We will end this, Robb," he said quietly. "I swear it." They conferred with the lords of the North and the Riverlands, introducing Oberyn Martell to them. Oberyn was flamboyant as ever, but he tempered his barbs, offering courtesy where needed. His frank admission of hatred for the Lannisters resonated with the Northmen, who recognized a shared enemy if nothing else. A plan took shape to surround the city, blockade it from the north and south, and launch a coordinated assault if the gates did not open. The next morning, Ned, Robb, Oberyn, and several lords rode closer to King's Landing under a white flag of truce, hoping to parley. They halted out of bowshot, banners snapping in the wind. A detachment of gold cloaks emerged from the city gates, led by the Hound, Sandor Clegane, grim-faced and silent. Next to him rode Lord Varys in ornate robes, and Peter Baelish in his mocking finery. It was Baelish who called out, greeting them with an oily smile that set Ned's teeth on edge. "Ah, Lord Stark," Baelish said, as though they were old friends. "What a surprise to see you alive. His Grace King Joffrey wonders if you have come to bend the knee." Robb bristled. Oberyn smirked coldly, but said nothing. Ned answered, voice firm, "I do not recognize Joffrey as the rightful king. You know the truth, Baelish. He is no Baratheon. Release my daughter Sansa and surrender the city. The realm need not bleed further." The Hound barked a laugh. Baelish spread his hands. "Alas, I fear King Joffrey will not accept such terms. He is quite convinced of his right to the throne. However, he might be persuaded to spare your daughter further distress if you and your northern army turn around and go home." His gaze flicked to Oberyn. "As for you, Prince Oberyn, the city stands well fortified. Dorne's spears are far from home." Oberyn spat on the ground. "We have come for Lannister blood. Give us the girl, and perhaps we will allow you to slink away to the Vale, Baelish. Once the city is ours, we will see who truly claims the Iron Throne." Varys fluttered his hands nervously. Such talk of violence. Surely we can find a less destructive path. The city is full of innocent people. Ned's patience frayed. He could almost taste Baelish's duplicity. If Joffrey refuses to surrender, the blood will be on his hands. We have offered a chance for peace. Release Sansa. If any harm comes to her, I swear by the old gods and the new, every Lannister in Westeros will pay. Baelish's eyes narrowed with feigned regret. "I will deliver your message, though I suspect it will fall on deaf ears. Perhaps I could smooth the way for terms if I had some surety of my own." He let the suggestion dangle as if hoping for bribes. Ned wanted to snap at him, but he held himself in check. "Do so, if you are as skilled a negotiator as you claim." A tense silence followed. The gold cloaks turned their horses and rode back to the city gates. The parley ended. Ned stared at the walls, that red stone that had almost been the site of his execution. Inside was Sansa. He vowed that if the city would not yield, he would tear open the gates. Preparations for the siege commenced. The combined northern and Dornish forces spread around the city, cutting off access. Raven messengers were sent to the lords near Blackwater Bay, urging them to deny any supplies to King's Landing. The waters of the Blackwater Rush were patrolled by small flotillas from Dorne, though the royal fleet still had a strong presence in the harbor. It would be a struggle to fully blockade them by sea without either a naval confrontation or additional allies. Ned worried that if Stannis or Renly approached from another direction, confusion might ensue. But all that truly mattered now was ousting the Lannisters. Let the Baratheon brothers fight for the throne after. A week passed. The city refused all offers of negotiation, and the gold cloaks made no further attempts at parley. Skirmishes erupted as Lannister loyalists tried to slip out of the gates at night, or foraging parties tried to gather supplies from the surrounding countryside. The northern outriders and Dornish spearmen ambushed them time and again, tightening the noose. Tension within King's Landing must have been mounting, with refugees fleeing or going hungry. The watchers on the walls grew more anxious by the day. Then, on a cloudy morning, horns blared from the western flank. Lannister reinforcements under the command of the Queen's cousin, Stafford Lannister, arrived, trying to punch through the lines in a desperate attempt to relieve the siege. Ned rushed with Robb and Oberyn to the site of the battle. The fields were churned into mud by cavalry charges. The clang of steel and screams of men filled the air. The fighting was vicious but swift. The Dornish phalanx, combined with the northern foot, held firm against repeated charges by Lannister knights. Then Robb unleashed the northern cavalry in a sweeping maneuver that hammered the Lannister flank. Oberyn personally led a spearhead, dancing through the chaos, striking deadly blows. By midday, Stafford's attempt had collapsed, his men either dead or in disarray. The survivors fled, pursued by the enraged Greatjon Umber. It was a clear victory for the Allied forces. Among the bodies on the field, Ned saw more than one whose surcoat bore the Lion of Lannister. He recalled his father and brother's end in the Mad King's court, the injustice that had plagued House Stark ever since. He clenched his jaw, determined not to let vengeance alone guide him. Yet there was no doubt that victory on the battlefield was necessary. In the aftermath, they tightened the siege lines further. Morale soared among the Allied ranks. Ned took advantage of the lull to dispatch yet another letter to King's Landing's gates, demanding the release of Sansa in exchange for leniency to the city's inhabitants. This time, they received a reply, though it came not via an official herald but from a battered courier who surrendered herself to the watch outside the mud gate. She bore a sealed letter from Queen Cersei. Inside, the letter read, "You presume to threaten us with siege and starvation. My son, King Joffrey, laughs at your efforts. Sansa Stark remains our guest. If you breach these walls, know that she will be the first to die. Withdraw your armies at once, or face the consequences." There was no formal signature, only the wax seal of House Lannister. Ned's hands trembled with rage. He tore the letter, letting the pieces flutter to the ground. Cersei threatened to murder Sansa outright if they attacked. Robb and Oberyn exchanged grim looks. "She has no honor," Robb muttered, eyes blazing. "She would kill her just to spite us." Oberyn nodded. "The Lannisters are cornered. Cornered lions are the most dangerous. We could attempt to infiltrate the city, find your daughter and spirit her out." Ned thought of the labyrinthine corridors of the Red Keep, the old passages. "It's too great a risk. If we fail, she dies." Despite the threats, the siege continued, for the Allies had no choice. Every day, the watchers on the walls could see more black banners with the direwolf sigil, more golden sun spears. Drums and horns echoed, an unrelenting reminder that time was running out for the Lannisters. The city's food stores would not last forever, especially with so many refugees who had taken shelter. The tension was like a drawn bowstring waiting to snap. Then, from the south, watchers brought word of another force approaching. Another host led by none other than Stannis Baratheon, marching from Storm's End. If Stannis joined the fray, the city might face not 2 but 3 armies. The realm's fracture was evident, and Ned feared that if they all converged in violence, the city would be drenched in blood, Sansa's included. As Ned stood upon a rise overlooking the city, gazing at the sprawl of King's Landing, he felt the oppressive weight of the future. So much death had already occurred in the realm. So much more seemed inevitable. He whispered a prayer to the old gods, thinking of Arya, lost. He thought of Sansa, trapped behind those red walls. He thought of the deal he had made with House Martell, forging a precarious alliance of convenience. He could almost hear the voices of those who had gone before. His father, his brother Brandon, even Robert Baratheon in his more decent days, urging him to do what was necessary to rid the realm of the Lannisters' corruption. All around him, war loomed. The men in the camps sharpened their blades, repaired armor, fed the horses. Spies and scouts scurried to glean more intelligence. Overhead, a falcon circled, as if surveying the armies below, indifferent to the strife of men. Ned Stark closed his eyes for a moment, summoning the image of a winter forest in the north. The faint hush of wind through the weirwoods, the quiet dignity of that old land. A single tear traced down his cheek, mixing with the grime and sweat. In that moment, he resolved that no matter the cost, he would see justice done, and he would save his daughter. He had been a prisoner of the Lannisters once. Never again. He opened his eyes, his gaze hardening. It was time for House Stark and House Martell, once enemies in another age, to unleash the storm that would topple the Lannisters' stolen throne. If they could succeed, the tides of war might still reshape the 7 kingdoms into something where honor and truth could thrive. If they failed, doom awaited them all. That evening, in the War Council tent, Robb pointed at a map spread out on a wooden table. "If Stannis arrives, we risk him attacking our forces instead of the Lannisters. Or he might attempt to strike the city from the east, stealing the victory and the throne. We need to ensure we don't become his enemy." Prince Oberyn sipped from a cup of wine, a sneer on his lips. "Stannis is a rigid man. He might seek to claim the throne by right of law. Yet we have Ned Stark who can support that claim or contest it. Perhaps Stannis would treat with us." Ned set his jaw, considering. "If acknowledging Stannis's claim spares the realm a worse bloodshed, I would do it. But I fear he might not look kindly on an alliance with Dorne, considering old grievances. Still, we must try. My concern is that he might press his advantage and ignore Sansa's plight. He would not let sentiment stand in his path." The tent flaps opened. A young officer entered, saluting. "My lords." Riders approach from Stannis's host under a flag of truce. Robb exchanged a look with Ned, who said quietly, "We will see what the Lord of Dragonstone wants. Perhaps we can avoid turning this into a 3-way battle." They left the tent. Outside, beneath the glow of torches, a party from Stannis's forces trotted up on horseback. At the fore was Ser Davos Seaworth, recognizable from the tales of the Onion Knight. He dismounted with a respectful bow, nodding to Robb, to Oberyn, then to Ned. The lines in Davos's face spoke of hardships weathered, but there was a sincerity in his eyes that Ned found reassuring. "Lord Stark," Davos said quietly, "I bring greetings from Lord Stannis Baratheon, rightful heir to the Iron Throne. He wishes to speak with you and your son, and any representatives of Dorne, to see if we might come to terms." Oberyn glanced aside. "And what terms does Stannis propose?" Davos shot him a measured look. "He knows the city is under siege by your combined armies. He wants the Lannisters dethroned, as you do, but he will not yield the throne to any other claimant. He asks for your fealty in exchange for guaranteeing that justice be done for your daughter, and that the realm be set aright." Robb frowned, his posture tense. "He expects us to bend the knee?" Davos turned to him. "He is the eldest surviving brother of King Robert. By all the laws of inheritance, he is the rightful king if Joffrey is indeed illegitimate. He knows that Ned Stark holds proof of that. He would see the realm united rather than torn asunder by multiple kings. He respects House Stark. But yes, he demands loyalty." Ned exchanged glances with Robb, remembering the letter from Robb about being named king in the north. This was not a trivial matter to set aside. The Northern Bannermen would be reluctant to kneel to any Southern king after what had happened. But if it meant saving Sansa and unseating the Lannisters, Ned's sense of honor tugged at him. Stannis, while stern, was a man of principle, or so Ned believed. That might be more tolerable than letting the Lannisters remain in power or letting Renly claim a throne he had no strict legal right to. Oberyn, however, had no love for Stannis or the Baratheons in general. He scowled. "And what does Stannis offer Dorne? We are not the dogs of the Iron Throne to be ordered about. My brother Prince Doran will want recompense for Elaya's murder. He will want the Lannisters to pay, and with them all who allowed their crimes to stand unpunished." Davos hesitated. "I cannot speak fully to that, but I do know that Lord Stannis has no love for the Lannisters. He is prepared to condemn them and see justice done. If justice for Elia Martell is part of that, I do not believe he would stand in your way. He is not one to defend the crimes of the past regime." A hush settled. The torch flames danced, creating swaths of light and shadow across the war camp. Ned saw the conflict in Robb's eyes. They had come so far, the North proclaiming their independence in the face of what was believed to be Ned's death. Now, with Ned alive, was it still so necessary to break from the Iron Throne entirely? The Lannisters were the true enemy. Stannis might be an ally in that cause. But could the proud northern lords swallow the notion of rejoining a realm under a new Baratheon king? Ned thought of the realm as a whole. He did not crave the throne, and he did not want a fracturing that would cause endless war. He looked at Davos. "Ser Davos, we will meet with Stannis. If it leads to a quicker end to the Lannisters and safety for my daughter, then so be it." Davos nodded gratefully. "Thank you, my lord. I will inform him. He awaits you at his camp tomorrow. We can host a council." The envoy departed. Robb exhaled, tension lining his features. "Father, the men named me king in the north. Am I to discard that now? Bend the knee like a child to Stannis Baratheon?" Ned set a hand on his son's shoulder. "You are no child, Robb. You have led the North with honor. But our ultimate goal is to protect our people. And that includes Sansa. If forging a truce with Stannis spares thousands of northern lives and secures the realm from further chaos, can we do any less? We will not rush. We will see what he offers." Robb gave a reluctant nod. Oberyn sniffed, swirling the wine in his cup. "Very well. But I will not accept terms that place Dorne back under a king who thinks to treat us like a rebellious province. The Red Viper will not be shackled." Ned almost smiled at Oberyn's dramatics. "We will find a way, Prince Oberyn. For now, let us rest. Tomorrow we speak with Stannis." So the stage was set for a momentous meeting that could shape the fate of Westeros. Ned Stark, alive and determined to rescue his daughter from the Lannisters, stood on the cusp of forging a grand alliance between the North, Dorne, and Stannis Baratheon. If they succeeded, King's Landing might fall without utter ruin. The Lannisters might finally face justice. If they failed, the city would drown in blood, and Sansa's life might be forfeit. War demanded sacrifice, but Ned prayed it would not claim any more of his children. That night, beneath the solemn sky streaked with faint starlight, Ned found a quiet corner by a makeshift wooden shrine. He knelt as best he could, clasping his hands. Though he was no Septon, he uttered soft words in the old tongue of the north, beseeching the nameless gods of forest and stream to protect his family. He thought of Arya wherever she might be. He thought of Catelyn, the steadfast mother of his children, who had endured so much. And he thought of Sansa, alone in that den of lions, holding on to hope that she would one day see her father again. Rising slowly, Ned gazed toward the city's dark silhouette. No matter the cost, he would free her. House Stark would prevail. And if that meant standing beside Dorne's fiery spear, and possibly kneeling to Stannis Baratheon, so be it. Better that than let the Lannisters hold the realm in their poisonous grip. The night wind rustled the banners, carrying the mingled scent of campfires, sweat, and steel. Tomorrow would bring a new chapter in this war. Ned Stark was resolved that it would not be his last.